Hello and welcome to the second episode of Puca Stories with me, Dan.
And me, Dina. How are you?
I am super. I had a good week. You were there?
I wasn't actually for a lot of it. Maybe that's why it was super.
Maybe. Maybe we're on to something. No, I had a good week after Halloween and the episode coming out. And the feedback online has been
so
brilliant.
good.
Yeah, I've been really surprised as to anyone has listened to this.
I know, I haven't listened back to this.
No. And it was pointed out to me, I clearly didn't listen back to it. On the editing side of things, apparently there was a couple of background noises, we'll call them.
Oh, the kids laughing.
Yeah, the kids laughing. That was not a special effect of any description. That was literally just our children.
I know, but if it added to the kind of the atmosphere, then take it.
Yeah, might get them to cameo again.
And if you can hear something in the background here now, the kind of noise, that is our lovely dog Luna, who is... There she is. Yep. She's just wandering around the kitchen at the moment, and if we put her in a different room, she cries, and if we put her outside, she cries, and if she stays here, she cries. So yeah, apologies for the background noise, but she's just going to be like a little third host.
Picked up too much anyway.
Yeah.
And apparently there was a small glitch cut out of mid-story, so again I do apologise about it. I will need to pay more attention to that.
Well, in fairness, it was Jamie who emailed me and said that, but she said, I don't know if it was an editing thing or if you're trying to build suspense. So if that's what people thought we were doing, then that's what we were doing.
I did not know this, so yes, we will go with that. If only I could edit this out some way.
So we've 3 stories tonight. 3
very unusual stories.
And very different from each other.
Yeah, big time. Very... Yeah, one of them I was just... What the hell is happening? What is going on in the world? What the fuck?
Yeah, I think I know the one. And they're all kind of a little bit different, a little bit creepy. 2 of them are based in Ireland. Then we've got one from further afield over in England. And... yeah, that's the show manifesto. Okay, enjoy. It was a warm summer evening in June 1986. It was drawing close to my 19th birthday, and I was working long shifts in a restaurant in Dublin city centre. As I made the bus journey home, I was looking forward to a few days I had booked off. As I sat there thinking of the parties and wild nights ahead, my mood shifted from excitement to pure and utter exhaustion. It hit me like a brick. My mind and body felt so weak. The bus journey seemed to take a lifetime in my current state, and I was grateful to see the familiar stop on my street. As I departed the bus, my body began to shake. I was completely freezing. This was a stark contrast to the warm summer evening I was walking into. I could barely lift my head up to acknowledge the children as they were out playing, making the most of the longer days. Although only a 5-minute walk, it took every ounce of my remaining energy to get home and through the front door. As I entered the house, I fell onto the floor and cried. Having heard my distress, my sister ran to me and said, "What's wrong?" Having neither the strength or the understanding to explain, I told her I needed to get to bed and could she help me. She linked me and aided my incline up the stairs to the bedroom. I sat and my sister removed my coat and shoes. Fully dressed, I took refuge under the duvet to get some heat into my body. I had never felt a coldness like this. The last thing I recall was telling my sister that I just needed to sleep. And that was it. I was out like a light. As I lay in the bed exhausted, I was totally unaware of a doctor arriving to the house at the request of my mother. Having done his inspection and checks, he said I was suffering with extreme exhaustion and just to let me sleep for now. And that's exactly what my family did. I woke up some 26 hours later and felt renewed. I was utterly disorientated and did not realise a whole day had passed. I was sure it was the same evening my sister had helped me into bed. The room was filled with the dark summer's night, and I heard my mother and sister's voice downstairs in the kitchen. Deciding the next thing I needed in my journey of recovery was a good cup of tea, I headed to the bedroom door, but suddenly something caught my eye, stopping me in my tracks. My bedroom curtains were open, and across the street I could see a street lamp flickering. Beneath the lamp, breaking the beams of its light with its presence, stood a man. Wearing a trilby hat and an old-fashioned long mac coat, he stood looming next to the street lamp at an inhuman height of about 10 foot. When I looked, he was about half the height of the street lamp. Knowing I was now fully rested and this wasn't a hallucination, I began to shake inside. My feet were weighted down with fear, and I couldn't move from the spot. I could just stare at this apparition. As I stood there, I could feel he was aware of me. This being, who had been looking with its head facing downwards, slowly looked up at the window towards me. To my horror, it had no face. There was no features, similar to what you would see on a shop mannequin. I opened my mouth to scream, and it seemed like an eternity before any noise emerged. I couldn't break my stare with the eyeless being. My mother and sister ran into the room panicked and shook me to see what was wrong. I weakly pointed out the window and said, "Can you see him?" They looked baffled and comforted me, saying there was no one out there. Eventually, I pulled my gaze away and fled from the room. In the days following, I sat with my mother and I explained in detail about this man. She listened intently, and when I finished, she sat in silence for a few minutes. Eventually, she looked at me and said, "I do believe you, you know. I know you did see him, and the reason I know is because I seen him many years ago myself." She then went on to tell me the following account of her story with this being. It was the early 1970s, and my mother lived in Yorkshire, England. Married with 3 children, she worked her hardest to make ends meet. Living in an industrial town gave the opportunity for a variety of jobs. My mother had 2 jobs, one in the early morning in my school as cleaner, and the other in the evening. Working in the school meant she needed to be in the school and have the cleaning finished before staff arrived. This meant an early start for her, in which she would walk from her home to her friend's house who worked in the school with her. This particular winter morning, she left her house at 5 a.m, wrapped up warmly for the walk ahead. Unfortunately, getting a taxi or a night bus service was not an option back then. As she walked down the back streets, the winter frostbite at her cheeks, her little dog walked alongside her as he always did. He would walk to a certain point and then he'd head back to the house. He was always like a little protector on these dark mornings. This morning, though, her dog kept in tow with her, and at a certain point she beckoned him to go home, but he stayed, refusing to be deterred. Eventually giving in, she let him walk alongside, but she noticed he was very on edge, growling and not his usual happy self. Lost in her thoughts, she heard footsteps approaching from the distance. They sounded like a hobnailed boot, as the sound of them echoed off the empty road. Partially relieved to see another person, my mother walked on and seeing the wearer of these boots come into sight. There, walking towards her, was a male figure in a long coat and hat. Her eyes adjusted as she seen this man was abnormally tall. Fear sinking in, she started to walk faster and kept her head down, looking prominently at the ground. As the man drew closer, she felt her breathing quicken and her heart race. Now only a few feet away, in confliction with her instinct, she looked up. The man, almost now beside her, had no face. She gasped in fear, squeezed her eyes shut, and walked at a pace that was more of a run, and suddenly the footsteps just completely stopped. She quickly glanced behind, and the stranger was gone. Now more disturbed, she ran the rest of the short journey to her friend's home. As she reached the gate, her eyes were drawn to the house attached next door. Smoke was billowing from a window inside. My mother screamed out, and a man finishing his night shift up the road came running. He kicked down the front door and saved the entire family in a heroic fashion. My mother was very shaken and proceeded to work with her friend, quite unsure how to digest the morning's events. She added to the story that a local 11-year-old boy who attended the school that she was cleaning had been reported missing, and during the time he was found brutally murdered in the very week she seen this apparition. She didn't know if there was any correlation in the events that followed her encounter, but claimed that nothing good comes after seeing the 10-foot faceless man. Looking back, I cannot recall any negative events following his visit with me, but I know this being was dark and I never want to see it again. Ugh, that was a creepy story.
It really was, yeah. That was like 10 foot, just standing right outside your house.
I know, and you know, I've always had like this really irrational fear of opening my curtains upstairs and seeing something staring in at me.
That would be creepy.
Wouldn't that be
saying
really?
we live like the upstairs of a house.
Yeah, like obviously nothing is humanly that tall. I don't think I could deal with that. And then when I was younger, I was about 13 or so, where I'm from in Finglas, we had like this porch that came out, you know, like of the house. And I'll never forget going into my granny's room and falling asleep in her room and waking up and seeing a man staring in at me. And when I tell you, I lost my shit. I screamed the house down.
Who was it?
A window cleaner. He was standing on top of the porch because it was like much thicker than a ladder and safer, so he was just there. He didn't really give a shit if someone was asleep, but I just opened my eyes and looked at this man looking at me, and oh my god, like I'm surprised he didn't get such a fright that he fell off. Like it was so horrible. But yeah, I think it's like naturally installed in you that when something is outside the norm to kind of fear it anyway.
And what age would you have been then? Just
13 or so, yeah.
And yeah, you would have known then at that stage of Mothman.
Yes.
Was that ever an instant thought?
I've never been a fan of Mothman. I don't like moths and their flappy ways, so if you were to turn that flappiness into a man, I'm definitely not going to like it. I don't like anything to do with Mothman. He's the one cryptoid that just scares the shit out of me. I'm okay with like Bigfoot, Loch Ness, you know, all these lads. I think they're good crack.
So where is he supposed to be like based as such? Like Point Pleasant, is it?
Well, no, he was there like in the 60s in Point Pleasant, but then
do we tour or what?
Well, there's even like things like there was a photograph that emerged, which I'm pretty sure was photoshopped, like Mothman seen like a couple of hours before the events on 9/11 and all this other lark. I don't know if I'd put much into that. I think Point Pleasant.
Never seen the 9/11 one.
Have you not?
No.
It's. I suppose it's a bit of it's in poor taste as well, like given what happened. But yeah, there was a picture that went out saying that the Mothman was seen in New York, just before the terrorist attacks.
Right.
But then you know there have been apparent sightings of him in England, which makes me feel very itchy because that is very close by.
Closer than America.
Way closer than America. I just cannot deal with the thought of something big and flappy. You know what I mean? It's just that thought of something flapping towards you and no, I would be absolutely getting out of there.
Okay.
Yeah. But back to this guy though, this 10-foot man. I think the thing that frightens me most is he has no face.
Yeah, that's anyone, no matter 5 foot, 4 foot, if they've no face, they're gonna look fucking strange. Like.
I would agree. You can be at any foot, and once you don't have a face, you're pretty fucking scary.
No matter what footsies you are.
Exactly. Yeah, like I don't know, but they say that's something that's bred into us. It's like a psychological thing. We don't like something without a face because we can't identify emotion with it.
Right, yeah, I've heard that.
And that's the same reason why people apparently are afraid of clowns, because the mask, the big smile, is unchanging.
Well, it still has a face, though.
I know, but a pretty fucking weird face. Like, there's no clown mask that you would say is pretty pleasant. Even the ones that are meant. Like who?
There's Coco the Clown.
Who's Coco?
It was in Newcastle.
Oh, a local clown. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was like an indoor adventure place. It was just like a really old, overweight person. Really crap clown.
Are you sure this was actually meant to be a clown?
I hope he worked there.
I may need to go to the police. Okay, Coco aside, but like, look at the negative things that go with clowns.
Yeah, like I can see the creepy side of it in regards that it doesn't matter what expression the person underneath the makeup has. It's still like, it's just there's an extra falseness to it or something.
Yeah, you can't read their expression.
Yeah.
You know, especially because, you know, now that clowns, like the whole thing with more masks and stuff like that, like that's another level of creepy as well. Like when we were at Pharmaphobia, there was a whole for anyone who doesn't know, Pharmaphobia is like this Halloween event down Causey Farm in Meath. Really worth having a look at over the Halloween period. It's finished now, but
it's brilliant though.
It's so good, and one whole section of it was circus.
That's right, yeah.
I would not recommend if you were photosensitive, because, my God.
Oh yeah, that was very trippy,
wasn't it?
Yeah, it was like discos from years ago, and just those strobe lights going. But it was like, I don't know, it was like extra slow motion or something. I don't know, it's the fact that you're sober and walking or what.
I think the strobe was so fast it made everything else look like it was in slow motion.
Yeah, it was weird. It really was strange.
So yes, but you know, I really like this story. I like the way it's kind of it touches on the whole generational thing. You know, the way within families, I know in Ireland we say that, you know, a banshee is attached to a family, or any kind of harbinger of doom might be seen by you know, a parent and then their child and so on, and it's known within a family. So this is kind of like a different take on it.
Yeah, completely see where you're coming from there. Definitely. Right, I think we'll move on now to the next story, so we'll get straight into it. This story was sent in by Shay. I was on a camping trip with my family. It's called the July Braai. This is a group of people on Facebook that go camping every year in July. The campsite changes sometimes, but this time it was at a place called Trentfield Farm in England. It's part of the River Trent. This lake was a small section or flow off from the river. We drove through woods and eventually arrived at the site. I was 16 at the time. After we arrived, I reunited with some friends, Warren, Tristan and Brenton. The four of us decided to go do a bit of exploring. Now, it's going to be hard to paint this picture, but just beyond our campsite was a hill. At the top of the hill was a wooden gate. Go through the gate and walk down the hill and you find yourself at the lake. To the left is a barbed wire fence going across the river, and to the right is a path, shrouded in trees. Go all the way down the path and the lake ends. Just by the end of the lake, there is a group of benches. If you were to sit on the bench, the river would be right in front of you, but there is a small hill. So if you're sitting on the bench, the grass has a curve or decline to the water's edge. We went through the gate and started walking down the path. There was an old wooden jetty about halfway through the path. My friends and I decided to walk on it. An old woman appeared out of her house. We had no idea there was even a house there. Turns out she had a tiny house and the jetty was hers. She was screaming at my friends and telling us to get away from the lake. We don't understand. We thought she was absolutely bonkers, so we continued on. We swam, we laughed, we had a great time, and then went back to the campsite. We decided to meet after dinner at the bench, and it was about 7 p.m, still very light outside. I walked down the path alone, heard weird breathing coming from the tree line, but figured it was just my imagination. I sat and waited on the bench. While I'm waiting, I can hear something coming out of the water, moving onto the bank and progressing onto the grass. Now, obviously, I can't see it because of the slight decline, but I can hear this thing breathing. I start to panic, and as I get up to walk back, I see the guys coming my way. So now we are all sitting and relaxing and talking, and fast forward about 2 hours. From where the bench is, you can see the end of the jetty as clear as day. We are interrupted by the sound of screaming, but this was not human. Frozen still, we witness this 3 to 4 foot creature standing at the end of the jetty. It's slimy and has long fingers. It was slamming its hand into its head repeatedly and screaming out. When it hit its head, the head wobbled like it was jelly. Then it turns its head left, the start of the path, opposite direction of us, and it jumps into the water. Well, my friends and I were completely stunned. Then we noticed that my sister and her friend were running towards us. Both of them must have been the noise we heard, and both of them heard and saw this thing. So fast forward another hour or so, and we are still sitting there. Me and one of the guys decide to walk up the path and back down. It's dark now, and I thought I saw something greyish. This time no jellyhead coming out of the water and standing still just watching us. I didn't want to freak Tristan out, so I didn't say anything. We got back to our friends and we decided it's time to go back to the campsite. We agreed to take the longer, darker route home that Tristan was really pushing for. When I asked him why, he said that he had saw it come out of the water and watch us. He described exactly what I saw. We told people at the campsite, and one guy went to the lake the next day. He came back with scratches all on his back and said he had been attacked.
Well, that's really weird.
That would be very terrifying at a campsite and everything, like so close to seeing something, whatever the hell that was.
I think because the comparative is with jelly, I'm finding it really hard to be scared.
Yeah.
It's creepy, but then I'm just thinking of a jelly head, and I'm thinking, how dangerous can jelly be?
Not if it was with some ice cream or something like that. No, that's really weird though. Like, what the fuck?
I know, I know that Shay had sent in some pictures that we'll post up on the Facebook page as well for everyone to have a look at to get an idea of this place. But I can imagine at the time it would have been really, really creepy. And looking back on it, and still kind of, she sounds freaked out even now recollecting it.
Yeah.
You know, so it's obviously made like an imprint on her. But yeah, it's really creepy.
Yeah, like I really wouldn't fancy that. We used to go like caravanning back when I was younger, and no, Jesus, if I had seen that somewhere like Castlewell and Nick or something, I'd be like, oh no, fuck that. Not going back over there.
I am gone.
Yeah.
No, it's very different though. You know, I love the classic kind of poltergeist, paranormal stories, and then you get something like this and you're like, what the hell? I'm gonna have a Google of this area and see if there's any history of
what the history there is, and any
haunted
other
jelly.
reported haunted jellies.
Oh, that's a really good story. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sending that in.
So on to our last story of the show today. This story I know well because I was there when it happened. But it's a submission from my auntie, from her point of view, probably a much better point of view, as I was very young when this happened, so I have a very cloudy memory of it, but it's a really, really good story. So let's get going. My mother, sister and niece had travelled down to us in Wexford to spend time with myself, husband and 3 daughters. After a week of day trips, late night movies and memories being made, it was time for them to head back to Dublin. At this time, almost 25 years ago, we didn't have the motorway that we do now, and the journey could often take over 2 hours. That being quite the task with 3 young children in tow, we stopped en route at a Greasy Spoon for some chips to break up the trip. The adults sat to one table and the children at the table beside them. We all began to tuck in and chat among ourselves. 2 of the kids were acting the maggot, and my husband Arthur went to tell them to stop messing. He just seemed to stop mid-sentence and quickly left the restaurant. Thinking his behaviour a little unusual, I followed him outside. The events that followed, I still cannot explain. As I walked out of the restaurant, I seen Arthur staggering. As I walked out of the restaurant, I seen Arthur staggering around in a panic state. He was clutching his throat, and it was evident he was choking. I ran to him to try and help in some way, but he fell to his knees as his oxygen levels dropped. At this point, all my family were outside watching in horror, and a crowd had begun to form. I beckoned my mother to bring the children inside. They really didn't need to see what was unfolding. I attempted hitting him on the back, but my efforts were unsuccessful. I could see his skin was turning blue, and I screamed for someone to call an ambulance. In hindsight, I know an ambulance would never have arrived in time, but in the moment it was a logical demand. As Arthur weakened, a man approached us. As strange as it sounds, the first thing I noticed were his shiny black shoes. He was smartly dressed and wearing a trilby hat. Although my husband was here, potentially choking to death, an air of calm followed this man, and he had my full attention from the second of his arrival. He gave me his hand to help me stand up off the ground, and he very calmly placed his arm on Arthur's shoulder and whispered into his ear, "It's going to be okay." In the blink of an eye, myself and Arthur were sitting on the windowsill of the restaurant. I looked at him and he whispered, It's gone." The piece he was choking on had vanished. He is adamant he didn't swallow it and it didn't come up. As he said, it simply vanished. Even more notably, the man who had been stood before us only seconds prior was now nowhere to be seen. As we stood and tried to orientate ourselves, I seen the man in the distance removing his hat as he got into the back of a black car, and just like that, he was gone. As everyone rushed to Arthur's side in the aftermath of the incident, we kept telling people that this man had saved him. We didn't know how, but his words did nothing short of a miracle, really. Very quickly, it emerged that nobody else knew the man that we were speaking about. They reported seeing us beside the window together, but claimed that no one approached us. It seems myself and Arthur were the only ones to see this man. To be very honest, it really didn't scare us. We were still full of adrenaline and relief. We were just so grateful for the positive outcome. But this is where the already peculiar plot begins to thicken. Only 3 days later, I was sat at a bus stop in Dublin, and a woman approached me and warmly said, "You are a very lucky woman." She placed a piece of paper in my hand, and as I looked down at the paper before me, there was a picture of the man who had saved my husband's life. My head shot back up with a million questions to be asked, but the woman who had gifted me the paper was gone. In my shock, I turned the paper over and discovered that this man was a priest from many years ago who was gifted and blessed throats. Many worshipped him for his curing abilities, even now, many years since he passed away. The words were on the page and his picture was clear, but I just kept staring. It didn't make any sense. Like it couldn't. How could a ghost have saved Arthur's life? And I never did get my answer. Many years have passed and his face remains clearly etched into my mind of the day that I truly witnessed a miracle.
Well, that was crazy. Like, what the fuck? Who was the old woman?
What old woman?
To give your aunt the picture.
Oh, sorry, I was totally like, what? We listened to the same story. I don't know who she was. I wasn't there that day. I was there the day that Arthur was choking.
Yeah.
I was one of the kids that was acting the shit that nearly killed him.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
And kind of a funny side to this story, which I know you're like, how can there be? But
yeah, funny near-death experience.
One side that, like, you know, if my family were ever telling this story, they always have to bring this up. Whilst Arthur was out choking, I was outside, and then I ran in really dramatically. And my mum followed me in, and everyone was like, "Oh my god, the poor child, she's like traumatised, you know." And my mum ran in and she was like, "Are you okay?" I was like, "Yeah, I was getting my chips, they were going cold."
Oh, fuck's sake. Priorities, they.
Priorities. So, you know, like, my uncle was there near on, like, death's door, but you know, I didn't want to have cold chips.
No, definitely not.
I know, so definitely priorities. But yeah, so this is like, to this day, like, we all talk about this story and none of us can forget like that, the day that happened. So I didn't see the man in question, like it says there, but I don't know, I think it's the closest thing I'll ever hear, like probably ever be able to reference to maybe an angel.
Yeah, that's how it sounds like to me. Whereabouts did this happen?
Oh my god, she did tell me it's between Wexford and Dublin. Rathcoin.
So was it like a roadside place or what?
Yeah, it was just like a little chipper, like your average kind of town chipper, you know.
Right.
And I can remember it really clearly, like the chipper, the chips were fab, just if anybody's wondering. But yeah, like it was just like your average little place, like nothing special about it.
With good chips.
Good chips, definitely good chips.
Near Killaman. Thankfully didn't, but no, he did. He got a big fright that day, as you can imagine. Yeah. And would your auntie be able to, like, could she even explain what the lady looked like that day that she got this picture of that just fucking vanished too?
I imagine she could, yeah. Like, she sent me this story through, so I've taken it from her own words here. So, but there are definitely parts that she could probably, you know, give better description of and kind of give you a bit more info on. But that was the main gist of it anyway. And it's one of those stories that, you know, it reminds me of something from a TV show, the way that has a follow up, that like they seen this guy's face and he was, you know, he had passed away, and it's weird.
There is like a TV show or a movie or something there with that.
I know,
especially
right?
with everyone just disappearing when you look at something and look back and they're just gone.
I know.
Fuck that shit.
So, but yeah, like, you know, it's such a good story because, and I like, obviously we're getting a couple of family submissions here because we're early days and we've yet to harass anybody else for stories just yet. But yeah, it's a good one. I like this one a lot. And the fact that I was there and I remember the events, it makes it a little bit more creepier. But yeah, like,
especially being real young too and not as sort of clued into.
You don't have the bias of what normality is when you're young, which is, I think, why so many children are sensitive. But this story is probably the closest thing that I would ever call a miracle. I'm not religious in that sense, but at the end of the day, this guy came along and it seemed to save his life. Yeah. So kudos to
his nice shoes
and his shiny shoes.
His shiny shoes.
And that's our 3 stories for today.
Yeah. If you would like to submit a story, you can email them to us through pucapodcast@gmail.com, and you can follow us online both on Facebook and Instagram, just Puca Stories. Should come up if you just search it. It's Puca.
Puca. And that's it for today.
Do you want to do your song?
I'm not going to do my song just yet. I had an idea for a song that I could have sang for this podcast, but I'm going to wait till a few episodes in because we're still trying to get people to listen, and I'm pretty sure that'd frighten them away.
Yeah, probably best leaving it at that for now.
Awesome. So until next week.
See yous.
Bye.